wondering if the very system designed to educate us might actually be the one that limits us the most. Picture this. You're 5 years old, standing at the edge of a forest, eyes wide with wonder at every rustling leaf, every dancing shadow, every mysterious sound calling from the depths. Your mind races with questions. What lives in there? What secrets hide behind those ancient trees? What magic waits to be discovered? But then a hand falls on your shoulder. "Come along," says a voice. "Time for school." You're led away from the forest, away from the questions, away from the mystery. You're placed in a concrete box with fluorescent lights, told to sit in straight rows, and handed worksheets about trees instead of being allowed to touch them. What happened to that child at the forest's edge? Where did that burning curiosity go? And more disturbingly, what if that moment, multiplied across thousands of days, fundamentally rewired your brain to stop seeking the forest altogether? Here's a question that might disturb you. What if the very institution we trust to develop our minds is actually the one systematically dismantling them? What if every gold star, every grade, every good job for sitting quietly was slowly teaching you to abandon the most precious thing you possessed? Your innate drive to explore, to question, to think for yourself. You see, there's something Arthur Schopenhauer understood about human nature that modern education seems to have forgotten entirely. He observed that children are natural philosophers. They ask the deepest questions without fear. They see the world with fresh eyes. They haven't yet learned what they're supposed to think. But somewhere between kindergarten and graduation, something dies inside most of us. That something is what Friedrich Nietzsche called the free spirit. That part of you that refuses to accept answers simply because they come from authority. That part that would rather discover truth through personal experience than memorize it from a textbook. But here's what's truly unsettling. This isn't happening by accident. When Schopenhauer wrote about education in 19th century Prussia, he noticed something chilling. The schools weren't designed to create thinkers. They were designed to create workers. Not dreamers, but doers. Not questioners, but followers. The system was working exactly as intended, producing compliant citizens who would serve the state without causing trouble. Sound familiar? Think about your own school experience for a moment. How many times were you told to pay attention when your mind wandered to something actually interesting? How many times were you punished for asking, "But why?" Too many times? How many times were you made to feel ashamed for thinking differently, for seeing the world through your own unique lens? Every time you raised your hand with genuine curiosity, only to be told, "That's not what we're covering today," a little piece of your natural learning instinct died. Every time you were graded on how well you could regurgitate information rather than how deeply you could think about it, you learned that original thought was not just unnecessary, it was dangerous. This is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of the death of God, not just the literal death of religious belief, but the death of all the old authorities that once gave life meaning. He saw that when we kill our capacity for independent thought, we kill something divine within ourselves. We become what he called the last man, comfortable, safe, but utterly without the fire that makes life worth living. But here's the truly terrifying part. Most of us don't even realize it's happened. We walk through life thinking we're making choices, thinking we're being ourselves, never recognizing that nearly every preference we have, every goal we pursue, every dream we chase was handed to us by a system that never asked what we wanted. We become strangers to our own souls. The child who once stood at the forest's edge, trembling with excitement at all the unknown possibilities, grows into an adult who feels vaguely empty, who can't quite remember what they used to be passionate about, who has learned to ask, "What should I do?" instead of, "What do I want to discover?" So here's the question that will haunt the rest of this exploration. What would you be like if you had never been to school? Not uneducated, but educated by your own curiosity, your own questions, your own direct encounter with reality. What dreams did you abandon? What parts of yourself did you leave behind in those sterile hallways? And most importantly, is it too late to go back and reclaim them? The answer might surprise you. But first, we need to understand just how deep this programming goes, and why two of history's greatest philosophers saw it as the greatest threat to human consciousness itself. There's a moment that happens in every classroom around the world, thousands of times each day, that reveals the true nature of what we call education. A child raises their hand, not because they want to give the expected answer, but because something has genuinely confused or excited them. Their question comes from a place of authentic wonder, and the teacher says, "That's a good question, but we need to stay on track." In that moment, something profound occurs. The child learns that their natural curiosity is an inconvenience. They learn that genuine inquiry must be sacrificed for the curriculum. They begin to understand, without anyone explicitly telling them, that school is not about learning. It's about compliance. Schopenhauer saw this pattern with devastating clarity. He understood that true education, what the Greeks called paideia, was supposed to be the drawing out of wisdom that already exists within the soul. The word education itself comes from the Latin educare, meaning to lead out. But what he witnessed in the Prussian school system was exactly the opposite. A systematic pushing in of predetermined information, regardless of whether it connected with the child's natural development or authentic interests. He wrote something that should chill every parent and teacher. All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. The tragedy is that most children never make it past the first stage. Their natural insights are ridiculed so consistently that they learn to stop having them altogether. But why does this happen? Why would a society deliberately design a system that crushes the very capacity for independent thought? The answer lies in what Nietzsche called the will to power, not just the desire to dominate others, but the deeper drive of any system to perpetuate itself. And systems that depend on conformity, on predictable behavior, on people who will follow orders without questioning them, cannot afford to have too many genuine thinkers running around. Think about it. What would happen to our economic system if everyone suddenly stopped wanting things they don't actually need? What would happen to our political system if citizens started thinking critically about whether their leaders actually serve their interests? What would happen to our social hierarchies if people stopped believing that their worth could be measured by external achievements? The system would collapse. And the system knows this. So it does something incredibly clever. It takes the natural learning process, which is messy, non-linear, deeply personal, and inherently unpredictable, and replaces it with something that looks like learning but is actually its opposite. It takes education and turns it into schooling. Here's how the substitution works. Instead of allowing children to follow their curiosity, we force them to follow a predetermined sequence of subjects. Instead of letting them discover their unique gifts and interests, we measure them all against the same standardized metrics. Instead of encouraging them to question authority, we reward them for memorizing what authorities have said. Carl Jung, the great psychologist who understood the human psyche perhaps better than anyone, identified exactly what this process does to developing minds. He called it the creation of the shadow. All the parts of ourselves that we learn are unacceptable, that we must hide or deny in order to receive approval. In school, the shadow grows enormous. Your natural rhythms? Shadow. Your unconventional ways of understanding? Shadow. Your tendency to ask inconvenient questions? Shadow. Your desire to learn through play, through movement, through stories that ignite your imagination? All shadow. What remains in the light, what gets rewarded and reinforced, is a kind of hollow performance of learning. You learn to give answers that sound smart rather than wrestling with questions that matter to you. You learn to compete rather than collaborate, to hoard knowledge rather than share insights, to fear making mistakes rather than embracing them as gateways to deeper understanding. Nietzsche saw this process as a form of spiritual murder. He wrote about the death of God, But what he really meant was the death of any transcendent source of meaning that comes from within rather than from external validation. When we teach children that their worth depends on grades, that their intelligence can be measured by tests, that their future success hinges on their ability to jump through arbitrary hoops, we kill something sacred in them. We kill their connection to what he called their demon, that inner voice that knows what truly matters, what genuinely excites them, what their unique contribution to the world might be. But perhaps the most insidious part of this process is how it makes its victims complicit in their own diminishment. After years of being rewarded for conformity and punished for authenticity, most people begin to believe that this is simply how learning works, how life works. They start to see their own natural curiosity as childish, their desire for meaningful work as unrealistic, their longing for genuine connection as naive. They become what Schopenhauer called willing slaves, people who have internalized their oppression so completely that they will defend the system that destroys them. They will even inflict the same damage on their own children, believing they are preparing them for the real world. But what if the real world, the one we were born to inhabit, looks nothing like the artificial environment of the classroom? What if we've been preparing for a life that doesn't actually exist, while systematically destroying our capacity to live the life that does? This is where the true horror of modern education reveals itself. It doesn't just fail to prepare us for life. It actively makes us less capable of living. 20 years after graduation, Sarah sits in her corner office, staring at spreadsheets that mean nothing to her. She has everything she was taught to want: a prestigious job, a good salary, the respect of her peers. She followed the formula perfectly. Good grades, good college, good career path. So why does she feel like she's suffocating? Every morning she wakes up with a knot in her stomach that she can't explain. Every evening she comes home exhausted, not from physical labor, but from the effort of pretending to care about work that feels completely disconnected from anything she actually values. She finds herself scrolling through social media, looking at other people's lives, wondering why everyone else seems to have figured out something she's missing. What Sarah doesn't realize is that she's experiencing what millions of adults face: the delayed consequences of an educational system that taught her everything except how to be herself. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he wrote about the hedgehog's dilemma, the painful paradox of human relationships, where we desperately need connection but have learned to present only our socially acceptable selves, leaving our true selves isolated and unknown. School taught Sarah to hide her authentic interests, to suppress her natural curiosity, to shape herself according to external expectations. Now, even in her intimate relationships, she struggles to know what she actually wants or feels. The symptoms are everywhere once you know how to look for them. The epidemic of anxiety among young adults who have achieved every milestone they were told would make them happy. The rising rates of depression in societies with the highest levels of educational attainment. The phenomenon of quarter-life crises and midlife crises. Those moments when people suddenly realize they've been living someone else's life. But perhaps most tragically, there's what we might call learned helplessness of the soul. Just as laboratory animals who receive unpredictable shocks eventually stop trying to escape even when escape becomes possible, humans who spend their formative years in systems that ignore their authentic needs often stop believing they have any agency over their own lives. They become what Nietzsche called the last man, comfortable in their mediocrity, no longer capable of the passionate engagement with life that makes existence meaningful. They settle for entertainment instead of joy, for security instead of adventure, for approval instead of love. Consider how this plays out in the most fundamental areas of human experience: relationships. After years of learning that love and acceptance depend on performance, on being the good student, many adults struggle to believe they can be loved for who they truly are. They become performers in their own relationships, constantly monitoring whether they're saying the right things, doing the right things, being the right person. Intimacy becomes impossible because intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability was punished in school. Work. The obsession with grades and rankings creates adults who are addicted to external validation. They choose careers based on prestige rather than passion, chase promotions rather than purpose. They never learn to evaluate their own work, to find internal satisfaction in a job well done, because 12 years of school taught them that their judgment doesn't matter. Only the teacher's does. Creativity. Perhaps most devastatingly, the standardization of education kills what psychologists call divergent thinking, the ability to see multiple solutions to a problem, to make unexpected connections, to think outside established patterns. Research shows that creativity scores actually decline the longer children stay in school. We're literally educating the creativity out of them. Decision-making. When every decision in school is made for you, when to sit, when to stand, when to speak, when to be quiet, what to study, how to study it, you never develop the muscle of autonomous choice. Adults who went through this system often find themselves paralyzed when faced with important life decisions. They're experts at following instructions but have no idea how to trust their own judgment. Relationship with learning. Most tragically, school kills the love of learning itself. The joy of discovery is replaced with the anxiety of performance. Knowledge becomes something you acquire to pass tests rather than something that enriches your understanding of life. Many adults never read books after graduation, never pursue learning for its own sake, because they unconsciously associate learning with judgment and stress. Jung observed that when we suppress essential parts of ourselves, our curiosity, our creativity, our authentic desires, they don't disappear. They go underground, into what he called the personal unconscious. There they fester, creating what he termed neurosis, a split between who we are and who we think we're supposed to be. This split manifests in countless ways. The successful lawyer who drinks too much because she's never addressed her desire to be an artist. The teacher who's bitter and controlling because he never learned to trust his own authority. The parent who pushes their children relentlessly because they never learned that their worth isn't tied to achievement. But perhaps the most insidious consequence is what we might call existential amnesia, the complete forgetting of who we were before the system got hold of us. Most adults can't remember what they were naturally curious about as children, what made them light up before they learned to seek approval instead of joy. They've become, in Schopenhauer's words, willing prisoners of a life they never consciously chose. They mistake their cage for the entire world, their conditioning for their identity. They pass this same limitation onto their children, believing they're preparing them for reality when they're actually preparing them for the same prison they've learned to call home. The most tragic part? Most people never realize there was ever any other way to be. But what if I told you that this prison has no locks? What if the bars that seem so solid are actually made of nothing more substantial than habit, fear, and forgotten dreams? What if the key to your freedom has been in your pocket all along, waiting for you to remember how to use it? This is where Nietzsche's most radical insight becomes not just philosophy, but a practical guide to liberation. He understood that the first step toward freedom isn't learning something new. It's unlearning something old. It's what he called the revaluation of all values. The courageous act of examining every belief, every assumption, every should and must that governs your life, and asking the dangerous question, says who? The journey back to yourself begins with a shocking realization. Almost nothing you believe about yourself is actually true. That voice in your head that says you're not creative, that's not your voice. That's your third-grade art teacher who made you feel ashamed because you colored outside the lines. That feeling that you're not smart enough, that's not your assessment. That's the echo of standardized tests that measured only one narrow type of intelligence, while ignoring the dozen others you possessed. That sense that you need to be practical and abandon your dreams. That's not wisdom. That's the internalized voice of a system that needs you to be predictable, manageable, controllable. Schopenhauer offered a different path. He believed that wisdom came not from accumulating knowledge, but from what he called the art of not being deceived. the ability to see through the illusions that society presents as reality. For him, the greatest illusion was that happiness could be found by following other people's scripts for your life. So how do you begin this great undeceiving? How do you start to distinguish between your authentic voice and the chorus of conditioning that has been speaking for you all these years? First, embrace sacred solitude. Nietzsche and Schopenhauer both understood that you cannot hear your own thoughts in a crowd. The constant noise of other people's opinions, expectations, and judgments drowns out the quiet whisper of your authentic self. You must create spaces of genuine solitude, not just physical aloneness, but mental and emotional space where you can encounter yourself without performance, without agenda, without the need to be anything other than exactly what you are in this moment. This means turning off the phone, walking away from the constant stream of other people's lives on social media, sitting with your own thoughts, even when they're uncomfortable, especially when they're uncomfortable. Ask yourself, when was the last time you were truly alone with yourself? When was the last time you let your mind wander without trying to direct it toward productivity or distraction? That restlessness you feel in solitude, that's not boredom. That's your authentic self trying to get your attention. Second, reclaim the right to change your mind. One of school's most damaging lessons is that changing your mind is a sign of weakness, that consistency is more important than growth. You were taught to pick a major, stick with it, build a career around it, and defend it for the rest of your life. This is insane. Growth requires the courage to abandon ideas that no longer serve you, even if you once invested heavily in them. Nietzsche called this the snake that cannot shed its skin. When we cling to outdated versions of ourselves, we stop being alive and become merely historical artifacts of who we once were. Give yourself permission to be interested in things that don't make sense to other people. Give yourself permission to quit things that drain your life force, even if you're good at them. Give yourself permission to start over, to try again, to admit you were wrong about what you wanted. Third, trust your body's wisdom. Years of sitting in chairs, following schedules, ignoring your natural rhythms have disconnected you from one of your most reliable guides, your physical intuition. Your body knows things your mind hasn't figured out yet. It knows when something is nourishing or depleting, authentic or false, life-giving or deadening. Start paying attention to how different activities, people, and environments affect your energy. What makes you feel more alive? What makes you feel like you're slowly dying inside? Your body is constantly giving you this information. School just taught you to ignore it in favor of external authorities. Fourth, practice dangerous questions. Instead of accepting the questions that school and society hand you, what do you want to be when you grow up? How can you be more successful? What should you do with your life? Start asking questions that lead to deeper territory. What would you do if no one was watching? What would you create if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you attempt if you didn't need anyone's permission? What makes you feel most alive, most yourself, most connected to something larger than your individual concerns? These questions don't have easy answers. They're not meant to. They're meant to wake up parts of you that have been sleeping, to reconnect you with the mystery and wonder that school systematically trained out of you. Fifth, become your own authority. This is the most radical act of all. Stop outsourcing your power to institutions, credentials, experts, and authorities. Start trusting your own direct experience of life. Start valuing your own insights, your own observations, your own discoveries. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissing all external wisdom. It means developing what Nietzsche called intellectual integrity, the capacity to think your own thoughts, to form your own judgments, to create your own meaning rather than consuming someone else's. You were born with everything you need to live a meaningful life. School taught you to doubt this, to believe you needed their permission, their validation, their stamp of approval. But you don't. The path back to yourself is not easy. It requires facing the fear that has kept you in comfortable cages. It requires disappointing people who prefer the predictable version of you. It requires admitting that you've been living someone else's life and having the courage to start over. But here's what awaits you on the other side: the return of your natural creativity, your authentic curiosity, your capacity for joy that isn't dependent on external circumstances. The recovery of your own voice, your own rhythm, your own way of being in the world. You get to become who you actually are instead of who you were trained to be. And that might be the most revolutionary act possible.